Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I'm delighted to be joined by JP Mason and also by Declan McConville. Welcome back to the show, guys. How are you?
I'm very well, Paul. Cheers for having us on.
No, it's always great. It's always great to see you, Declan. You and JP, you were just saying the last time you saw each other in the flesh was on a European away day. Is that right?
I think so. I've just been reminded about that there when Celtic used to qualify for Europe after Christmas. There we go.
Those heady days. It was just as we were about to get herded away from the outside. I was waiting on my pal Michael, and the very heavy-handed Spanish police were about to basically sweep us off the pavement if we didn't move. That's exactly where I met you, just there. So luckily we didn't get on the wrong side of them.
No,
absolutely. But as you say, memories of yesteryear where we were able to progress in Europe seems like a long while ago. However, even further back, JP, there's a jersey over your right shoulder. And I know that we speak about it quite often on the podcast when you appear, but that is one of my favourite Celtic tops of all time. That's class. Which player do you think of when you look at that jersey?
Jerry Craney.
Do you?
Yeah, Jerry Craney. I think it's just because I've got highlights from games around that time, and I'm pretty sure Jerry Craney, and the highlights I've got taped off the TV, Jerry Craney scores a couple of goals in it. So I think maybe Tony Mowbray as well. Yeah.
It's interesting how jerseys do spark these memories, JP, right? And did you know with your musical affiliation that Jerry Craney is full cousins with the Kane brothers out of Hue and Cry?
That is unbelievable. Celtic / music knowledge there.
True story.
I had no idea. I also heard rumours that he's now a taxi driver in Hamilton.
That's unconfirmed because you know this. He's the head of youth at St Johnstone.
Is he?
Aye.
Oh right, okay. Now,
I know this we're digressing here, but yeah, it's important. It's important to talk about Jerry Craney when we can. Head of youth at St Johnstone.
Right. Well, I mean, I just want to clarify. There's absolutely nothing wrong with being a taxi driver. It's just that with his, I mean, he was a great, not a great striker. He was a good striker. But you'd like to think he'd still be involved in the game in some aspect, and I'm glad that you've informed me that he actually is. So
yes, but that's because I interviewed the other Kane brother who plays bass for the Proclaimers.
Brilliant.
It just goes on, doesn't it? I mean, the players that I think of was from the actual catalogue that season. The models were Brian O'Neill and Gary Gillespie. There you go. We blast from the past.
Yeah, that's for the times, isn't it?
Oh, I know. Now, before we get on to the big subject, how can we get re-engaged with the club? Let's just talk a wee bit about one of our pundits who has been a superb addition to the show, Anthony Haggerty. Unfortunately, he had to deal with Jobbygate last night. He had to deal with Jobbygate on Hamilton TV because he was commentating on the game and his co-commentator came out with his faux pas, which has been spoken about all morning. But it brought back memories of Tiger Tim. Remember he lost his job? You remember that, JP?
I remember Tiger Tim had a radio show, and I remember the wee jingle, like at the end of the show, what are you going to do after the Tiger's gone? Remember that?
I can't remember the radio show, but
after the Tiger's gone. It was like at the end of every show ended with that little jingle. But
is that right?
I didn't know that Tiger Tim got the sack.
He used to speak over the tannoy and play the records at Celtic Park, and he asked for a minute's silence one night when Rangers got knocked out of Europe. Oh, the 90s. Great days. They weren't really great days, but, we can look back on them. Now, let's talk, Declan, about this disengagement. I mean, how, obviously, apart from the obvious not being able to go to the games, how disengaged do you feel as a Celtic fan at the moment with the club?
Massively disengaged. The club have got two major platforms in terms of YouTube and Twitter, and they just don't seem to want to communicate with them. There's no strategy to talk to fans. They've got everybody's emails as well. Obviously, if you're a season ticket holder, you get your pass to paradise sent out. There's no engagement. Whenever there's an announcement or anything happens, you just don't get told. It's as if the club don't want to tell anybody anything.
Well, someone suggested, and I can't take credit for it, that this address from Peter Lawwell could perhaps be done before a game. Because you're talking to the season tickets who are logging in with your virtual season ticket. Do you think that would work, Declan? I mean, it's it's still one-way traffic. It's not as though you can engage with them, but it would be an address to the fans, a direct address, rather than the contrived video that was set up to apologise for Dubai.
It probably would have been a better idea in terms of just that kind of connectivity with the club, or some kind of pre-match show that's a bit more than just two ex-players and Jerry McCulloch at the side of the park talking about the game, talking about the week's ongoings at the club. You know, the platform's there. I know maybe some staff might be furloughed. I know the Celtic View's not really operating just now, but platform's there to do, so they should use it.
Now, we put out a wee bit of pre-match entertainment ourselves, JP, the other night, and it was an interview with Mark Hughes and Mark Bowen. What's your thoughts on Hughes and Bowen as a managerial team that could come into Celtic Park should the vacancy arise?
It's certainly not something. I've only watched the first 20 minutes of it, so I can't comment on the full thing. But I mean, I certainly wouldn't be against them being considered. You know, just because of this whole, well, they've been out of the game for X amount of months or X amount of years or whatever it is. You know, they're not fossils. Do you know what I mean? They're clearly intelligent guys, and they both love football. And having that chemistry between two people in charge of a football club, you know, can't be sort of scoffed at or looked over. You know, because I think you only need. I mean, it still frustrates me that Neil Lennon took the job on the basis that he was given the staff to work with, and he just kind of went, "Oh, okay, then I'll do that," you know, because that's what you want. That's what will happen. You know, it's just frustrating to think that, you know, he didn't dig his heels in. And I think going forward, whenever there is a change in management, as there will be inevitably at some point, when that'll be, who knows? But when that happens, there's got to be some sort of shift from that, you know, oh, well, we'll just give this guy a job because he's been here. You know, no disrespect to John Kennedy, but I'd rather see a manager come in and pick his own backroom staff, and if that means that John Kennedy has to leave and go elsewhere, then so be it. You know, it's not a case of just keeping guys on just because, you know, they played for Celtic or that they've been here. You know, he was under the previous regime as well, and I find that quite strange that he was here under Brendan Rodgers and now he's sort of under Neil Lennon, but there's no connection there. You know.
Now, Declan, I know that you're a big fan, as we all are, of Neil Lennon. What's your current kind of stance on the managerial setup at Celtic? Some people are suggesting that, you know what, there might not actually be a change. What's your take on it?
I thought after the game on Saturday, the post-match comments kind of indicated that it had ran its course, but for the time being, it looks as if nothing's going to change. For me, kind of after when Celtic went out the cup to Ross County was probably the point where I thought this needs a change because targets are set at the start of the season. They weren't fulfilled when you go out a cup competition. So at this point in time, I don't see anything changing unless something really, you know, I get a severe doing.
Well, the thing is with that, JP, we keep hearing about the Mowbray moment, you know, and you could probably go further back and talk about the John Barnes moment, a result that was so bad that there's no way they could stay on. But I think we've had a few of them this season.
Yeah, we have. I mean, I you know, like yourself, Declan, I've been, you know, flying the Neil Lennon flag as long as I could. But there has to come a point where there's Neil Lennon's part of a whole thing that isn't working at Celtic. I don't think you just go straight to the manager with the axe. It's there's, you know, clearly the Loyal's leaving at the end of the season. That's been identified as needing to change. That's one of many things I think needs to change, not least the engagement with the fans and just a root and branch, you know. And I know that Neil Lennon's come out and said, "Oh, I think it's a ridiculous thing to suggest that we look at a root and branch change." But the evidence that's been presented this season and the way that the collapse has happened, you know, to be so far behind, to be out of Europe, you know, beaten 4-1 twice off Sparta Prague. Yes, we beat Lille. Yes, we put up a decent fight against Milan and we were 2-0 up in the San Siro and all of that. But ultimately, we came away with nothing. We played pretty well against Rangers at Ibrox, came away with nothing. You know, it's there's only so many times you can put that argument forward and be like, but we didn't win anything.
I know. You're going from quadruple treble to potentially a trophyless season. Now, in doing the Celtic State of Mind broadcast on a daily basis, what can sometimes happen is hosts of other podcasts want your take on things. So a couple of weeks ago, spoke to a chap, Mike, down in Liverpool, and we did a podcast where he was asking me various things about my Celtic supporting life. And then this week, ESPN asked us on to talk about the current situation at Celtic. So I was speaking to two guys who were based in the States, and they basically asked me, so explain, how did it go wrong? What went wrong? Why did it go wrong? Declan, what a question that is, by the way. What do you think? It is difficult to say that it's one thing or even a collection of things or one person or a team of people. Where do you think this started to unravel? Has this really been an issue for the last 2-3 seasons or beyond, and it's just starting to unravel now? Do you take into account all the mitigating circumstances around Celtic this season? In your view, Declan, is a root and branch restructuring required?
I think the club need to change direction. We've been a lot of success for the past 9 years, but there needs to be a freshen up with Peter Lawwell going. That needs to be in the form of a new kind of structure, I think, with the director of footballing. One cause, I probably couldn't give you one cause. I always kind of go back to the day we get presented the league, and I thought everybody then wanted Neil Lennon to be manager and to be successful. So it wasn't as if this was just a big... at one point everybody went, let's all change our mind. Everybody wanted Neil Lennon to be successful, but as time went on, I think maybe Ferencváros is a point where things started to change. I know we get dumped out by Cluj and we went on to have a good season, but not qualifying for the Champions League kind of starts you in a way behind, and then dropping points at Rugby Park, then going 2 games behind, and then it just started to spiral out of control from there onwards, and it just got worse and worse, and then just everything has just went wrong as badly as it could. Probably not one major factor, but there's been a lot this season, Paul, and it's just been a complete disaster. It would actually make for a really good book. I don't think anybody could have thought this book could have been written, but the book could be written now. People would have thought it was probably fiction, but it's going to be non-fiction because it's been absolutely crazy.
You couldn't have made it up. But see, when you're looking at all the different reasons, one of the big things, JP, that often you're focusing so much on everything that's going wrong with recruitment and with Neil Lennon and the coaching staff, and yeah, they're all valid. But again, at the same time, Neil Lennon came out last week and said, I need the players to really step up here. He said that after the St Mirren game. I need a bit of a reaction from my players. Do you think he got that midweek against Kilmarnock?
He got it against a pretty, I thought that Ibsen boy played well for Kilmarnock, and he could have probably scored 1 or 2 for them. I thought he looked decent, but I think Kilmarnock looked a team in disarray, and we definitely got them. Finally, we got a team at the right time for us. Just as we got St Mirren at the wrong time on Saturday because they were bang up for it off the back of a 5-1 victory at Tannadice. Their tails were up, and you could tell within the first 10-15 minutes of that game on Saturday that we were really going to struggle. One of my friends, my pal at work, was just like, I think 4-0 tomorrow, and I was like, Stephen, what football are you watching right now? Because we have not got a 4-0 in us, and obviously subsequently got one against Kilmarnock, but it's a different kettle of fish. I think he got a reaction. I think there was something I wanted to mention about, there's been a lot of chat about us tiring in the last 20 minutes of games.
Yeah.
I don't know if I subscribe to that, because apparently the training is exactly the same as it was last season, right? Nothing's changed. We've heard that quite a few times from players and the manager, as if to say, I don't know what's going on, because we're doing exactly the same thing as we were last season. And you look at, Lazio away, like Ncham and Edward sprinting forward, to win the game in the dying moments of the game. That was, so the fitness wasn't getting questioned then, but the fitness is getting questioned now. So I don't really understand what that is, and if I do believe that the players are unfit, or if it's just a case of not surely they're not trying. I mean, God, you're a professional football player. You're trying until the very last kick of the ball. But those wee things like I think it was Kevin that mentioned that Christie taking the shot and skying it and then looking over at the bench as if to say, don't dare criticise me for missing a shot or whatever. Wee things like that, they are not healthy to have in and around the team.
No, they're not. And you do tend, because things are going so bad, JP, and unexpectedly so, that you do focus on every single element. And you do look at even the expression on Christie's face after he's missed a shot, and we tear it to pieces on the bulletin and we analyse every nuance of Celtic Football Club. But the big thing about the fitness, I've been looking at the interview that Neil Lennon gave in relation to Ncham. Now, also, we do have two French speakers on the ACSOM WhatsApp, one of whom was David Slight, who was on last week, and he was looking at some of the translated broadcasts of the Ncham interviews after, obviously, the Marseille debacle, and some of them are inaccurate. So we've seen previous broadcasters doing that in Scotland before, haven't we? But he certainly did not want Ncham at Marseille, and that's why he's left AVB. But when Neil Lennon was talking about him, he did say that he wasn't enjoying life in Glasgow. He didn't have a great opinion of Scottish football. So although he doesn't wake up one day and deliberately says, I'm down in tools because I don't want to play for Neil Lennon or I don't want to play for Celtic, sometimes we tend to forget these guys are human. So they don't have the same motivation this season as they did last season. And there's a cliche of down in tools, but they're certainly not performing at their optimum. They're certainly not putting in the same shift as they possibly did in the famous game you mentioned, JP, against Lazio last season. And now you get away with having one or two of them in a squad. I think a big problem this season is we probably had half a dozen of them, and it's all happened. They've come to that point in their cycle at Celtic all at the same time. I think you've always got one or two guys like that who are coming to that point, like Van Dijk did. And he came to the same point when he went to Southampton, where he basically did down tools. He refused to play. I think that is actually something that happens in the modern game now. So you've got a very good player in Ncham who, isn't really trying to his optimum. And if you've got 4 or 5, even 6 of them in a squad, then you really are going to struggle with that. Declan, how big a part do you think that's been? Jeremy Frimpong continued to play right up until he was sold, but he made it known he didn't want to be at Celtic. If you've got half a dozen guys like that in the squad, then surely some of the players need to take responsibility as well.
I think I went back to there and alluded to that the post-match Ferencváros comments. When a manager's saying there's an unhappy dressing room, there's players that don't want to be there, they want out, you don't keep them. So whether that's Neil Lennon's fault, whether that's Peter Lawwell or Dermot Desmond's fault, I don't know. Whoever's decision it was to keep players that weren't happy was never going to be a good idea. If it was an executive decision, it's guys above you that don't really know the game and don't know how much effect that can have in a dressing room. And as you proceed to have bad influences in a dressing room when you're going for such a monumental achievement, was never going to work. And, you've got two, possibly maybe just one bad apple out there during that January window in Ncham. Don't know if Frimpong was causing any issues, but as you say, Paul, you were trusting Frimpong in a lot of big games where effectively his head was at another point where he's saying, this doesn't really affect me because I'm going to be going in January, so what does it matter? So when you're going for such a big achievement, to have players in about the dressing room, and we know it's first team players, your Edwards, Ayers not let us down. But the other guys, Ryan Christie as well, same form as last season, it's not been there. And these are players that we really, really rely upon, especially Edward and Christie. And for latterly last season, Olivier Ncham. No,
you're right. Now, see, when I was looking at the lineup, it's always interesting, isn't it, when you're waiting on that lineup coming out for a Celtic game, and you see the reintroduction of Scott Brown into the team, JP. I'm thinking to myself, you're going to the old tried and trusted players. Yes, he's the club captain, he's very influential. The last time we had seen him was when he was sent off against Livingston. I actually was quite impressed with his performance. I think when he scored the goal against Kilmarnock, his reaction was one of, almost, because there's a bit of anger in there, there's a bit of passion in there. But I like that. I like that in a Celtic player. I like it in a captain. Do you think Neil Lennon is going to go with people like Scott Brown between now and the end of the season? Or do you see the introduction of some other, maybe younger players, such as Stephen Welsh, who I thought played really well against Kelly?
Yeah, I like Welsh as well. I just wanted to mention something a little bit about Encham before I talked about Scott Brown. But the thing with Encham is a curious one because Villas-Boas can't. How could Villas-Boas have made an assessment on Olivier Encham's personality and his attitude and everything else when the guy was barely in the door? Had they even met at the point that he gave that press conference? So I actually have a theory that Villas-Boas has possibly been in touch with Neil Lennon with regards to that, because if he's been told, "Oh, you're getting this guy," it's not going to be hard for Villas-Boas to get Lennon's number and basically phone him and say, "What's this guy like?" And Lennon will have filled him in on Cham in the last year or two, So like he's already got an opinion of him before he's even walked in the door. Because how else would he had it? I mean, yes, he could have watched tapes and all the rest of it, but you're not going to know. You can't make a judgment on a guy's personality based on watching him play in half an hour of a football match. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's happened. Anyway, Cham, I said on this show, when one of the first times I was ever on, I said that I thought that maybe some of the Celtic players were just tired of winning. And that's been echoed by the manager in recent comments. He actually said the exact same thing. And it's a horrible thing to say. And if I take my Celtic specs, hat, top, everything off, and then look at it, they're just professional footballers who've won everything in the game for 4 years in a row. I say everything in the game, everything in a domestic game. And these guys obviously are like, well, won another treble, well, great, okay. Oh, I won another one, okay. And maybe they just saw the glass ceiling being hit in terms of Europe and thought, well, it's better that we want to move on and get more money somewhere else and play in a different league, maybe play with the sun on our backs, like Larson wanted to do eventually after his 7-year service. Different breed of player, obviously, of course. But anyway, that's my tuppence worth on Cham. Scott Brown, I put in the comments in the pre-match thing on here that I was pleased to see Scott Brown back in the starting lineup because I think against St Mirren at the weekend, we definitely missed him and someone like him in the middle of the park. I think Storrow's been good since he came in, but I don't think Storrow is at the stage yet where you hang your hat on him every week and he's like Mr. Reliable. And, I think Scott Brown still has something left in the tank to give, as he proved in the Scottish Cup final when he won that header in the extra time to get the goal for Griffith, as he proved the other night by actually scoring a goal himself, which is a rarity. And just talking the other players through the game, helping like the Welsh at the back, that can only be. I mean, how much encouragement and advice is Storrow going to be given to Welsh? No disrespect to Storrow, but he's not got the same, mother tongue as Welsh, so you want Brown to basically be bringing him through. And I certainly wasn't surprised by his performance. I think he probably knew that he owed us one, and Lennon won for the ridiculous sending off against Livingston.
Yeah, I would agree with that, JP. And I think when you're looking for maybe high points, any kind of positives from the bad run of form that we've had, the poor season that we've had, I'm going to put Welsh in that category. I think Storrow and Turnbull are kind of the obvious ones. Turnbull turning out to be the best signing of the transfer business we did in the summer, which, when you're looking at bringing in AC Milan players, Shane Duffy came to quite a big reception. We knew El Yunusi, we knew what he could do. The Barkas situation, £5 million goalie, but Turnbull has been the best signing of the lot. And obviously we face his former club on the weekend, and we'll talk about that as well. Now, Declan, the other thing that struck me was Brown comes back in. Ayeti obviously was reintroduced. It was good to see him on the score sheet. But where does that leave Lee Griffiths? I mean, there's been loads spoken about Lee Griffiths in terms of fitness, going back to one of GP's earlier points. The potential fallout between him and Neil Lennon. Is he finished at Celtic Park?
That's a big question. Again, post-match comments on Saturday, when the manager was asked about recruitment, he seemed to want to have a go at Griffiths more than anybody else as a player that's not doing it for him. Whether he's finished at Celtic Park, I don't know. I think there's a year left in his contract come the summer. Whether Celtic just let that run down, don't think anybody else could really afford his wages. But Albi Ayeti, again, back to post-match comments, conditioning not being good. His condition's only been sorted. Why is it taking till February for that to happen? Game time wise, since his last goal, I think he played about half the game time on offer. So he's not really had a good run of games. He was played, I think, in the Motherwell game as a lone striker. I don't think he's a lone striker. So you're going to trust the guy that you've paid £5 million for, but whether or not they replace Edouard's another question. Griffiths might get back in when Edouard goes, or he might not, because him and Ayeti are probably quite similar, penalty box strikers, poachers. So I don't really know in Griffiths yet. But again, no, he should be looking towards a European Championship that he's going to need to try and make his way in the squad for, and this is not going to help him whatsoever.
No, you're right. Now, Russell Boyce made a really good point the other night in the post-match, whereby he says, when it comes to Griffiths and Brown, there's almost default excuses. Oh, Brown's not playing well, his legs are gone. Griffiths isn't playing well, he's no fit. And he wasn't buying it. Russell wasn't buying the fact of the fitness. And I take Declan's point on board. By February, if you're Albi Ayeti, you're an international footballer, or if you're Griffiths, you're an international footballer. The onus is on you. You've got to be fit. We're in February. I mean, the season's now winding down and you're just getting fit. It's an incredible situation to be in, JP. And when I'm looking at Lee Griffiths, I just think that there comes a point where so many chances have been handed out, be that by the support, by the club, or by various managers. There comes a point where you think, you know what, you might be part of this upheaval, you might be part of the fallout, the restructure, and you might not be part of Celtic's new kind of philosophy going forward.
No, I know. He's had more comebacks than Frank Sinatra, and including at Ibrox as well, where Frank Sinatra had a comeback. Even somebody saying they wish they'd gone to see him. That was a gig that they wished they'd been to see, was Frank Sinatra at Ibrox. That actually happened. Did you know that, Paul?
No, but you know what? If you tell me it happened, I'm believing it, JP.
It did happen. Yep.
That was a real gig. But yeah, Lee Griffiths is a strange one. It's just, there's just been this sort of constant circus around him, and he comes back, he does well, he scores a crucial goal. Everybody's like, yes, really pleased to see Griffiths scoring, and then, he sort of falls away again, and it's just, he's never really had that sort of consistent, scoring every week. And there just always seems to be something with him, and it's really frustrating as a fan. You want to see every player doing well, and it's just not really working for him at Celtic anymore. And I don't like saying, oh well, in the summertime it's time for him to move on or go to a Hibs or whatever, because ultimately you know how good he is and you know he can score goals out of nothing, and you'd rather see him do it for us than go to Hibs and then haunt us at Hibs. Do you know what I mean? Because that's inevitably what happens when we sell a striker. They come back to haunt us. Look at Bratback, Larson. There are many others. Can I just pick up on a point from Kenny67? He said, JP, tired of winning, come on. Players love to win. If there's a drop in their motivation, then it's up to the manager to recognise that and stimulate them, or move players on and bring in hungry ones. Well, the latter point is true, and whether Lennon has had the authority to move players on and bring in hungry ones is a different story, because we don't know who's in charge of the recruitment at the club. And then it reminds me of something else I wanted to mention about the Shved signing. So Lee Congerton brought in Shved, as we're led to believe, right? And he was the guy in charge of the recruitment at that point. But clearly Brendan Rodgers didn't want to hire Shved. But Brendan Rodgers took Lee Congerton to Leicester. So somebody other than Lee Congerton and Brendan Rodgers signed Marion Shved. It's surely a fact that happened. So
that's a good point. Yeah, it's a very good point.
Yeah, so if I could ask Peter Law a question, it would be who signed Marion Shved, and I'd probably add in several others to that as well, like Marvin Comper, etc., etc. But clearly Lee Congerton and Brendan Rodgers have a good relationship. So it's not like Brendan Rodgers has went, oh, I know you got me a dummy with Shved, but you could just come down to Leicester anyway, So
no, I think that's an excellent point, and I'm maybe skipping a wee bit ahead of myself. There's loads of great comments that I'm going to work through as well. But Shved's on my list here today because I'm looking at the restructure of Celtic in the summer, the upheaval of the squad. I mean, there's going to be an upheaval. You just know that there's so many players come to that stage of their own Celtic cycle that we're going to lose quite a few of the players who have maybe been mainstays for years. The financial situation at Celtic, the uncertainty of fans back in stadiums, all these things, I think Celtic will be treading very carefully in the transfer market. And I'm looking at the squad we already have. I think one of the biggest issues we've had is, going back to one of your points, JP, recruitment, but also youth development. So I've got two things I would like to talk about. First of all, when you're looking at the recruitment, will Celtic consider some of the players we already have out on loan? Now, some of them obviously are already young, kind of up-and-coming players. Kerr McInroy performing very well at Dunfermline by all accounts. Scott Robertson now on his second loan deal. I seen him playing for Celtic and I thought he looked very promising alongside the aforementioned Olivier Ncham. Marian Zved started scoring goals for Mechelen. You've got Jack Hendry starring in Belgian football. Leo Connor, a fullback, believe it or not, who's playing very well for Tranmere. And you've got other players like Bayo, a guy that I didn't rate, but we spent a couple of million quid on. Are the club going to be very cautious and look and assess the squad and end up bringing back guys that you thought were on their way out of Celtic? Do you think that'll be part of the transfer strategy, JP? And if so, does that excite you or otherwise?
I don't know. It all depends on what changes are made in the summer and what opportunities are afforded to these guys if they do come back. Because you've seen guys go out on loan before, like Christopher Ayer. Yeah, it's kind of hard to even remember the fact that Christopher Ayer, a guy who's probably worth now, I would say, and this isn't bias, he's got to be worth 25 million at least. If Frimpong's going for 11.5. Christopher Ayer is head and shoulder with the potential ahead of him in terms of his development. Christopher Ayer, strange thing, Kilmarnock had that guy for a season. You know what I mean? Like they'll not have many players like him ever play for them. No disrespect. I mean, neither will we, to be fair. We don't have a litany of those guys. We've got more than them, obviously, but it's rare that somebody like him comes along. So you've got the example of him and Christie obviously going to Aberdeen for a couple of spells and coming back a better player and working his way into the team eventually. So, yeah, I mean, it's just about their levels and their numbers, I suppose, when they're at these clubs and what they're hitting and whether or not they think that they can come back and do a job for us. But what a weird situation if Marian Shved came back and ended up playing for Celtic after everything that's been said about it. That'd be a real strange one. It
would be, but if he cuts in from the right and scores against Rangers at Ibrox, then all is forgiven. I'm just looking at the potential future situation at Celtic. I mean, the finances are going to play a massive part. Those at the helm will be looking at that as the priority, and if you can get success along with it, great. As supporters, we're just thinking of success, of course we are, and in the back of your mind you trust those in charge to look after the balance sheet. Declan, is there anybody you think from the names mentioned that could come back, like JP says, like a Chris Ayer, a Ryan Christie, Callum McGregor? These guys have went away and developed elsewhere.
I think Scott Robertson's one who, like yourself, I watched against, it was Cluj he had his debut against, and he played really well. He's a player I think that's still got bags of potential in. A player in the squad who I don't think really get a fair crack at it, Ewan Henderson as well. He's been in the fringes for 2 years now, and he's not really been given a big chance. He's a guy under your nose that's still there. I've got problems at the back. I don't know how assured Jack Hendry is now, but again, was that just a confidence issue? Because at Dundee, he did well, and he looked like a decent enough centre-half. So whether he could return too, and there is Marian Shved as well, who his manager seems to have done a complete 180 on, criticised him when he came in, wasn't doing the business, but spoke about an attitude change. He's now starting to put in performances. Listen, if you've got players there and we know they can give us something back, bring them back in and give them a shot. If it doesn't work out, you've still got plenty of time in the window to move them on.
The thing, you mentioned a couple of young guys, and one of the high points of my season, one of the positive points has been the fact that Welsh has broken through, and I'm delighted about that. But when you're looking at some of the young players you've mentioned, I now get the sense, JP, that if a young player now isn't going to get the first team opportunities at Celtic, they'll simply go elsewhere. They'll just engage with their agent and say, I want to move. We've had loads of young players leaving Celtic before they even play a first team game, and that's a huge concern. And it was a bigger concern again waking up this morning and seeing that Vincent Angelini could be the next on his way out. Now, this is a young guy, he's a goalkeeper. and he played alongside Karamoko Dembele in, you know, under 13, under 14 at Celtic. Now he's Davy Hayes' grandson. Now the Celtic link doesn't end there. So Vincent Angelini's grandmother, Davy Hayes' wife, Catherine, is the niece of Joseph Ray, who played for Celtic decades ago as well. So that, I just thought, the young kid, and he looks brilliant. He got like player of a tournament, I think, that we played in Amsterdam when he was 14, 15, is now wanted by Lazio, Juventus and Manchester United. I mean, how can we compete when these clubs come in? We've just lost another young player, goalkeeper, in Liam Hughes. You know, and Cameron Harper's away to New York Red Bulls. And they just are added to the list of players who have gone to Bayern Munich. Josh Adam to Man City. Okaflex apparently is wanted. Dembele is wanted. If we don't look after them, like Declan suggests, then we're going to lose all these young players, JP.
Yeah, that's quite concerning that they're obviously seeing first team opportunities are, you know, going to be lacking for them, you know. But you only need to look at examples of recent players like Kieran Tierney, Callum McGregor, James Forrest, that if you're good enough, then you'll get the run, you know, you'll get in. It's just, if in a few years' time all these names that you've mentioned come back to bite us and they're all starring in the top leagues and they're worth a fortune, then we're going to look extremely foolish at this point, or at that point, should I say, because we've let these guys go for next to nothing, and they've come up. We've reared them. They've come up through our squads and our systems. I didn't know that about. It's funny you should say that about. Is it Angelini? Did you say his name was?
Yes. Yeah.
So going back to yesteryear, my friend Michael Taggart, his sister was married at Seamill Hydro, and I was at the wedding. And the same day, Davy Hayes' daughter was being married as well. And both families were marrying an Italian. I remember it was like both were Italian Scottish weddings. So that must be Angelini's mum and dad, which would make sense because I think it was around about 1999, 2000. But there was a host of Celtic greats at that, and I bumped into Sean Fallon in the corridor.
Wow!
And I knew straight away who he was, and I've got his autograph in a wee autograph book. But I just went up to him and I said, Mr. Fallon, I just wanted to say, hello. I'm a Celtic season ticket holder, and you know, and he went, "Oh, what's your name, son?" And I was like, "John Paul." And he went, "Oh, well, we know what you are with that name." And then he shook my hand. Like troubles. I'm not joking. Huge hand, and I just remember how warm my handshake it was, and it was amazing moment. I was like, I can't believe I walked away just completely floating that I just met Sean Fallon, you know. So
a great man. Yes, I always go back to that interview that I did for one of the books, and an incredible day, great man to meet, and you know, sorely missed as part of the Celtic family, as we call it. Now, you mentioned Dyer before, JP. It actually sprung to my mind when I was watching the game the other night at Kilmarnock on that plastic pitch, that is a guy. Now, I don't know what the transfer fee will be once he finally leaves. I think you use Kieran Tierney as a kind of benchmark, don't you, when you're looking at the top player at Celtic. He will play for a team like AC Milan. There will be a moment in the future. Why is he worth more than Frimpong? He's a full internationalist, and he has been for several years. In terms of his development, he's way ahead of Frimpong, if you ask me. He's playing at the moment in a bad Celtic side, but still looking like head and shoulders above them. And when you look at that, you think, well, I'll think back to that night at Rugby Park when I see him playing for AC Milan in Europe, or if I see him starring for Norway in the finals of a tournament, because he is one of the guys that's going to leave us. I mean, how do you replace him? I would much prefer to rear our own, absolutely, but we need to use the transfer market far more wisely. And I think when we go into the summer months, and you know, we've got then coming Dominic Mackay, I think there's going to be a fresh approach, a fresh look on Scottish football, not just Celtic. You know, the way to engage with fans, like anyone else who last week when they heard the news started searching old interviews with Dominic Mackay, see some of the stuff that he's done with Scottish rugby. It's very impressive. It's hugely impressive. And I think getting back to the main point of the show today, how can Celtic get supporters back on side? You know, Twitter can be a horrible place at times, you know, and I don't think often the level of vitriol that you actually see in your reads is something that is unassailable, if you know what I mean. It's not as though you're going to lose these fans if you make efforts to engage with them. So we've heard some of the suggestions, using your social media platforms, as Declan says, using what's at your disposal. But the big one for me was when Kevin was talking about Celtic players phoning season ticket holders, JP. And I think Kevin Graham's going to be the first on the list, because obviously he came on to clarify that point the other day. And you've said there yourself in relation to, meeting absolute heroes. I actually think that kind of thing is gone. The modern player is a completely different beast to your Sean Fallons and your Davy Hayes, who have come up in conversation today. Now, Declan, I know through his journalistic kind of background, has met a lot of Celts, a lot of ex-Celts. Do you think we're entering we're in a stage, Declan, where we need to accept that modern footballers are never going to be the same kind? Even going back to, the centenary team, Frank McAvenny, for example, he'll stand and he'll chat to you if you meet him. Have we entered the realms where we're never going to see that again with Celtic players?
I think it depends. I mean, certainly homegrown players just now, Scott Brown and Callum McGregor and stuff, will stand and have a conversation with you, and they're nice guys, I think, as the game's moved on, obviously we've got a lot more of a kind of international contingent in the squad now that, they're not what you would call homebred, and going back to that centenary team, it was full of Scottish, English, Republic Island internationalists. I think your homegrown players are always going to be, you can always relate to them and have a chat to them. That'll be the same as Stephen Welsh, who I'm sure is quite grounded. Kieran Tierney was also absolutely terrific. On a one-on-one basis, I think anybody that ever met KT would say that. Same as Scott Brown. So I think your homegrown guys will always kind of stop, have time for you in a chat. But I think the way the game's moved on, you have moved away from that, and there's a bridge between, the modern player and fans now, that there's no meeting place in the middle of it. They're so far removed. I mean, at Lennoxtown, they will stop and they'll sign autograph for fans and stuff, but it's not like the olden days when they'll turn up to functions and spend their Saturday evening in the company of Celtic fans. Those days are long, long gone.
I mean, there's some really good comments coming in via YouTube, Twitter and Facebook. Declan O'Kane on YouTube says transparency with the fans on what's happening in the next 5 years. What are the club's aims? Who's coming in to replace Neil Lennon? When is that happening? Even is it happening? Because, I mean, we're talking about engagement, JP, and we've yet to hear the response or the results of this review. And I guess part of that review is the plans short term to medium term in relation to the management team. I mean, transparency is key, surely, and a strategy over the next 3, 5, 7 years. The fans need to buy into that, don't they?
They do, yeah. And on the subject of the review, I'm just playing devil's advocate. I'm not trying to stick up for Celtic or anything like that. But it said, the quote was, the situation will be reviewed in January. That's what it said. I'm pretty sure. I don't think they ever said we will review this in January and present it to the fans. I don't think it's been misinterpreted. I think everybody would want to know what the decision is and what's going to happen going forward. I think, if you remember the season when we stopped Rangers winning 10 in a row, they announced that Walter Smith was leaving at the end of that season. So everybody knew that was happening. And it kind of, I wouldn't say it derailed them, but it's, I mean, I don't think it helped. I don't think it helped them at all. So I think they've maybe just been fearful or wary of saying, yes, Neil Lennon will leave at the end of the season when his contract expires. But in terms of like fan engagement, I think, like you were saying about fans, players going to like supporters club functions. I know we can't have any supporters club functions at the moment. We can't do a lot at the moment. But I think going forward, I think that if they could reintroduce that at some point, I think that really would help the players understand. Even if the player went to one engagement, in every couple of months or something like that, if it got spread around, we're not saying that they have to go to, was it Tony that said they should be going every week? It's like, it's maybe a bit much. But it's a bit over the top. But I think maybe once or twice every couple of months, just to experience what it's like in a room of 200 absolutely maniac Celtic fans who've had a few sherbets. They'll soon know, if they don't know already, what sort of club they're playing for. Because I've been in that room, for the Donald Burns suppers, and it's the atmosphere's amazing. It's properly powerful, and I'll never forget those nights, especially with Tommy Burns finishing the night singing "Mac the Knife." That was always a great finale. He did actually sing "The Greatest Love of All" by Whitney Houston one night. He completely went off piste. Everybody was expecting "Mac the Knife," and he sang "The Greatest Love of All" by Whitney Houston.
Love it.
It was powerful.
See, when you've mentioned it a couple of times, this is the Heriot Watt, isn't it? The CSC.
Yeah.
Was it the 30th anniversary in 2019 of that Burns supper? Was it? It must have been something around that, the 30th anniversary.
I honestly can't remember. I know that we the last one that happened, I'm pretty sure, was the Celtic Park one, where we did it kind of in tandem with Celtic. So you had sort of half the room, half the suite. The Kerrydale suite was, Glasgow Celtic Mafia, the great and the good that support Celtic, and then the other half was like all the reprobates that were in our supporters club. So it was great seeing, all those guys again, and and hearing people talk about, it was a lot of the centenary squad were there, which was amazing. Like I met like Peter Grant, Billy Stark, and all those guys, and that's where I got my tiny wee top further signed by more of that 88 team. And that was brilliant for me. As they were my first team. They're my sort of Hollywood Celtic team, if you want to call it that.
Definitely. No, it's great, and you do miss these kinds of things, JP, talking about getting together with Celtic fans in a room. And I know that Declan has set up similar at the Bertie Auld Celtic Supporters Club, Declan. But it's difficult, isn't it, to engage with the club and get someone from the modern era to come along and represent the club. And generally you would go to the likes of, I think, Danny McGrain, Bertie himself, John Fallon, players from yesteryear.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's even difficult to get a trophy along, never mind a player to your dance. It seems that far removed even. Sometimes it's just a lot easier just to engage with a kind of older player, or even we're meant to have Tom Boyd at our dance last year before it was cancelled. And all these guys will come along, they'll sit and they'll have a good night with you and sit at your table, tell you good stories. Obviously, Paul, you were at ours with Danny and John, and it was a good night. And I've had many of those good nights. I think the last do I was at was with yourself, Gordon Stackton and Paddy McCourt, which is another brilliant night. So, the things you pick up in these evenings are always great, and they're always a good night out. But if you got one modern day player along to them, I think they would enjoy themselves.
I found it interesting, actually, because you see a lot of these players doing the after dinner kind of circuit. I say after dinner, JP, it's a kind of same setup. Gordon Strachan turns up with a PowerPoint presentation. I kid you not, right? So you think it's a Q&A, but you ask one question, and then Strachan's actually got the button, and he just starts talking through his career, and he'll decide what he wants to tell you. He's not answering any questions, you know what I mean? And then he sits down. Oh, all right, I'll speak to Paddy McCourt then. But I found that pretty interesting. Gordon Strachan had it all set up on a PowerPoint. He'd obviously sat for ages setting this up, but he told you what he wanted to tell you. Yeah, there was no Q&A about it, Now, interestingly enough, obviously one thing happened last night in relation to the Hamilton Accies and bringing back memories of Tiger Tim Stevens over the tannoy at Celtic Park. But another thing that I did find interesting is obviously you'll be aware of Southampton's capitulation the other night against Man United, 9-0. Second time they've been defeated, I think, in 12 months, 9-0. And what's happened today, I was reading with interest that there's been a request by Southampton to ban Mike Dean and Lee Mason, no relation, JP, I'm guessing, from officiating future games involving the club. And it does beg the question. Now, I'm going to be very careful and balanced in the way I say this, but seeing Scottish football has been a discussion point for generations. within Celtic and within Celtic fans. And we've often asked for that so that you can get that transparency, so you can get that consistency, which is a word that Rangers like to use. And when you're looking at last night's decision not to send off Ruth of Rangers, you think to yourself, when was the last time they got a guy sent off in a league game? When was the last time a penalty was given against them in a league game? And, is it something that you think would ever happen again in Scottish football? Or have we been frightened as a club into not appealing for such changes in the game when you think back to the strike of the officials during Neil Lennon's first tenure?
Well, I think you just get, you get ridiculed and sort of, called like a moon howler or whatever if you ever come up with anything against that. But it seems, you look at the Morelos thing the other week against Hibs, and in the retrospective 3-match ban, it's just like the guy doesn't he never gets sent off in a game anymore, but he gets the ban after the game, and that's becoming norm. Like that, everybody could see that was a red card. Everybody could see that last night's was a red card, although I did see Callum Davidson had defended him. He's came out and said that he didn't think that it was a red and just hoped that Murray Davidson was going to be okay for the final. If he misses that final because of that challenge, that is an absolute sin. Because, there's not going to be, no disrespect to Murray Davidson or St Johnstone, but they're not going to be in many cup finals, are they? Like, let's face it. And certainly, maybe not him in his career. So I really hope for the guy. I have no previous love or hate for the guy, but I certainly hope from a footballing point of view that he can play in the final, because I think that would be horrible if he wasn't able to play because of that challenge. And I think, to be fair, when you look at it, Roof actually thought he was off. I think I thought he was heading for the exit, and then he turned back round and saw the yellow and was like, oh, okay, got away with that one. So,
but it's like you say though, JP, you get ridiculed if you suggest that there's any kind of conspiracy. The first thing they'll say is, you've just won 9 leagues in a row, 4 trebles in a row. How can there be an issue with refereeing? But what I would actually say is that it really is about consistency, because even the Kilmarnock game, if I take the green tinted specs off for a minute and I look at some of the flashpoints, no, I don't think Scott Brown should have been sent off. Absolutely not. Was Edouard offside? Probably. Was Yetis a penalty? I don't think it was. So I think it's more of a consistency issue in relation to the refs. I don't like targeting refs. I think that's a bold move by Southampton. And it's happened in Scottish football where there was a complaint made against Willie Collum and he didn't referee a game involving Rangers for several months. So I don't agree with that, because then you're singling out a referee that needs to go about his day-to-day business, and that's no fair. But it is something, again, that you're looking at in terms of the consistency. And by the way, I'm not using that as an excuse for Celtic's performances this season, because it's just a mitigating circumstance in relation to the way that things have gone this season. Celtic have been absolutely rotten, and it's nothing to do with the referees. The other thing I'm just going to quickly bring up while it's on the screen is Mark is reminding us ACSOM Literature and Music Festival one weekend in 2021. Can you imagine that, JP? That would be remarkable, wouldn't it? Let's get the Celtic fans together for a celebration of music, literature and Celtic.
Certainly, any sort of festival would be great at this moment in time, but that would be particularly good. I think everybody's just desperate to sort of, see other people and share real life stories instead of, doing it over the phone or over Zoom. And I think, it would be a tremendous release, I think, for everybody. It's just a shame we wouldn't have much to celebrate at it in terms of trophies or anything like that. But I think, honestly, the sheer celebration of just being able to do something like that would be a celebration in itself. I've said before, I didn't really get the same enjoyment out of basically this whole COVID-19 thing has I know that there's a lot of bigger things going on and people are obviously losing their lives, and that's horrendous. But if we're talking strictly football, it ruined our celebrations of 9 in a row. It's going to, I don't think it's going to impact as much on people as if this was a normal time and Rangers were this far ahead. People would be in a lot worse states than they are now, because you've got to look at things in perspective. And, like I said, people are dying we're still weirdly getting to watch football matches in empty stadiums every week, which I still find surreal. It's almost sometimes like it's not actually happening, and then you're like, well, this is going to be in the record books. Celtic won a league title in March, and we're given it in May. And the full season wasn't played out. Rangers are going to win a league, and not one person is going to have been at any of those games. You know what I mean? And some people will be like, "Oh yeah, we won the league that season." Like, how many games did you go to? None. It's just.
It is, and then you've got the Scottish Cup, and it'll be, that was the one that was run over the net. It's in the history books, and I'm looking forward to the time where we can look back on it, JP, rather than live through it. Paul Cockwell, welcome to the show. You're watching on YouTube, so if you are watching on YouTube out there, please subscribe. We're building up the channel to a wide audience, and we've got other shows that we put out as well, and you get things as well like the interview with Mark Hughes. We've done interviews with the likes of John Barnes, who I know went to your CSC dance as well, JP. Neil Lennon, although I don't think he's going to give us a part 2, there's an interview with Neil Lennon in there as well, so check out the YouTube channel. Paul Cockwell, what happens if Lennon wins all the next games? Can I be totally honest here, right? See, even if he did, I want change in the summer. I think it's part of a wider change. I want the restructure of the club to involve potentially a director of football. We need to look at the football club and that department as a whole, not just the 11 guys on the park. We need to look at the youth development and the way that, for me, it's not really been working, the way that we recruit players, the way that we develop them, and also the director of football, for me, being a buffer between the directors and the guy who's in charge of the football team. And I don't think that if you do that the current incumbent has to still be there. I think it needs a clean break. What about yourself, Declan? Is there any way back for Neil Lennon in your mind?
I think that kind of scenario would be like decorating the house after it's been demolished. I don't think there's any way back in terms of what's already preceded this season. The league's probably gone. Probably about a 0.5% chance of winning that. And as you say, I would like to start a clean slate moving forward. New chief executive in, change the structure, bring in a director of football, and probably a new management team. So I think the time for Neil to be manager at the club's probably now ran its course, and did so a good few months ago. Yeah,
what about yourself, JP? I know that football fans are a fickle bunch. I almost said something else there. They're a fickle bunch, football fans. We know that. You look at the way that the Man United fans were looking at Solskjaer earlier on in the season compared to now. That's just the way it is. But I just think in this season of all seasons, it's a wee bit deeper than that, isn't it?
I mean, passions and tensions are running high because of the situation that we find ourselves in with regards to the pandemic, not being able to go to the games. I think a lot of people hung on a lot longer than maybe other football clubs would with regards to Neil Lennon, and in terms of thinking that he could turn things around. If he did, as Paul mentioned in the comment, if he did win all the games, we'd still finish second. Do you know what I mean? Because there's no way that there's going to be any sort of collapse. You look at last night, a 1-0 home victory. They're just going to keep churning those results out, and fair play to them. They've been the most consistent side. You can't argue with it. I don't think they're a great side by any means at all, which makes this all the harder to take, because if you were losing to a really spectacular side playing dynamite football, then you'd be like, okay, if it was a Brendan Rodgers invincible team, then you'd be like, okay, hands up. But it's not. I just think maybe they were considering a change, and the pressure of going for 10 in a row, and thinking if we did change it, after Brendan Rodgers left, would that then, if we were trying to do something that was planning for a 5-year thing or whatever, then that means that we were putting in jeopardy 10 in a row. If you were like giving a manager some time to sort of bed in, so we were like, oh well, Neil Lennon's safe pair of hands, his sort of passion for Celtic and everything else, and will buy his time with the fans. The fans will surely get on board with that sort of idea, especially as he just won the league and the cup as a result. But what I don't like is there's some really poisonous stuff being put online about Neil Lennon, and this whole the red no Neil Lennon, that sort of badge that people are trying to promote. I think that's really, really bad, and I'm not on board with that at all. It's certainly not something that I would like to have representing me, because I just don't think that's very becoming of a human being to another human being. I don't think he's done enough to receive that level of negativity.
Declan, one final thing, looking ahead to this weekend, we're up against a team in Motherwell who seem to have got that new manager bounce, and obviously we've got to face them whilst they're on a decent wee run of form. What's your thoughts on the weekend? Do you fancy that our great run of form of 1 win and 1 might continue?
I think, again, go back to consistency. I would keep the same team. Probably will be the same team unless Sorrow gets reintroduced. I think we're a lot more comfortable with that back four. I thought the other night John Joe Kenny gave a lot more balance to the team. Wales looked a lot more assured in defence with Aya than Duffy and Beaton did. So I think if you continue with that, you could probably string a few games together, but it's too little too late now, unfortunately.
No, you're right. What about yourself, JP? I mean, even though it's the season from hell, I still look forward to watching Celtic. You know, I still look forward to running the match day stuff that we do on ACSOM. Do you fancy us to go to Fir Park and win on Saturday?
Oh, we're at home, are we not?
Aye, we are, aye. I mean, this is the thing. It makes no difference, does it? Is it Sky Sports or Celtic TV I'm watching it on?
I wouldn't fancy going to Fir Park on Saturday, to be fair. In real life, I'd love to go a good away trip, especially good memories of that 7-1 many years ago. But the game on Saturday, I think, Motherwell gave Rangers a game at Fir Park only a couple of weeks ago, and they only got a 1-1 there. And if we'd have gone there and got a 1-1, we'd have got absolutely slaughtered. So I just hope with the players, if the players turn up and put in a good performance, I don't see how we're not going to win that game. But it's Jekyll and Hyde. St Mirren to Kilmarnock on Tuesday was yin and yang. So I hope I like the look of Ajeti as the game progressed, and I want the guy to do well. You know what I mean? I want him to do well, not just because 5 million for him. We could have paid 500,000 for him. It doesn't matter about the fee for me. It's just like he seems like a likable enough guy. He wants to do well, and I hope he gets another opportunity on Saturday because I thought he took his goal well on Tuesday. And yes, it might not have been a penalty, but at least he put himself in the mix to get the penalty. And I don't have an issue with that.
I think it's about partnerships. You look at Edouard Ajeti, you hope that can develop. Welsh alongside Ayer, as Declan was saying before, you hope that can develop as well. I mean, we'll be covering the game half an hour before kick-off. Yes, it is at Celtic Park, but my venue remains the same, as most people's do. But yeah, thank you very much, guys, for getting involved on Facebook, Twitter, and also on YouTube. And all that's left for me to say this afternoon is JP Mason and Declan McConville. Thanks for joining me once again on a Celtic State